Um, we have a lot of people struggling financially in America. So what programs and services exist or did 6 months ago that we have been using to address this challenge in America?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Amy, and thanks everyone for being here. And Amy, thank you for that level setting. That I actually had a little bit of that prepared to share too, just because the way that you actually measure poverty is so important to our understanding of poverty. Um, and the official poverty measure or the supplemental poverty measure don't really meet the mark of what we need. And I think a big reason that is the case is that it doesn't account for variation in cost of living. And so like the poverty line in California is the same as the poverty line in Indiana where I live. And I can promise you where I live is not as expensive to live. Yeah, so I appreciate that. Um, and so to kind of to answer the question, to talk about, what's available, what's out there right now, we commonly hear it referred to as the social safety net, which I think is actually a helpful way of thinking about it, because you sort of in a net, you have a lot of different threads that are all interconnected to make, to make a net, right? That's meant to sort of catch individuals as their income falls and their situation becomes more precarious. And so some of the strands are healthcare related. This would include programs like Medicaid, which provides health insurance coverage for low-income families, people with disabilities, and seniors. The WIC program, which stands for Women, Infants, and Children, supports the health of mothers and newborns. So there's Social Security disability that also supports Americans with disabilities who are unable to work, and Medicare, which provides healthcare for retirees and some individuals with disabilities. These programs each have different target populations and eligibility requirements, but they're all focused on improving health outcomes. Um, Other strands of our safety net are related to nutrition. The most prominent example of this is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, which was formerly and perhaps most commonly known as food stamps. SNAP provides families with funds that can only be used to purchase food. And it's sort of like the program of last resort for many families who cannot afford to feed themselves. Also WIC, which I just mentioned, is also a nutrition program providing healthy food for mom and baby. It's kind of a good example of how these threads connect to each other as they support individuals and families. Um, some strands are related to housing, right? The Department of Housing and Urban Development, otherwise known as HUD, oversees many federal programs related to housing, such as Section 8 housing and housing choice vouchers. They help make housing more affordable by lowering the cost of rent based off of an individual or family's income. HUD also provides emergency rental assistance to help families avoid eviction and homelessness, and funding to homelessness service providers like shelters, and access to supportive services like in employment, healthcare, and nutrition. Again, another good example of how these threads connect together as they support folks. And finally, we have income supports. And the only federal program I know of that provides direct cash assistance to families is TANF, which stands for Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. And it's actually sort of a remnant of the welfare program that existed prior to Bill Clinton's presidency. It's only available to the very, very lowest income families. But there are other income supports that exist in our tax code, such as the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is a refundable tax credit for low-wage workers with little to no tax liability, and the child tax credit, which isn't provided in full to the lowest income families because it's only partially refundable, and has a rather steep phase-in that makes it difficult for the lowest income families, or makes it impossible, frankly, for the lowest income families to claim the full credit. But it is provided to families making as much as 400,000 a year. And because of the way that this is set up, currently 17 million kids don't receive the full CTC due to their parents not earning enough in wages. And under the House proposal, I know this is next, but that's going to go up to 20 million if Congress has its way here potentially today. And so all of these programs and many others make up what is most commonly referred to as our social safety net.
David, let me pass it over to you about either responding to me, Catherine, Devin, or do you have a different idea of what we could be looking for into the future? What is our 21st century solution to poverty in America?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you, and the comments in the chat about the perceptions, and like on this on the child tax credit, and I talked to a lot of Republican members of Congress and their staff, and the perception is always from them that if you're working, then you get the full child tax credit. If you're not working, then you don't deserve it and you shouldn't get it anyway. And then politically their view is Democrats just only want to give the CTC to people who don't want to work, and we want to give it to people who are working and do deserve it. So it's 100% a deservingness framework of like who and whose children deserve federal investments. Um, and I think that part of the way, at least that I have been working on that narrative. Now, there's two kinds of narratives, right? There's like the public narrative, which I think is a lot more difficult to change, but very important. And there's a guaranteed income community that has a whole narrative change cohort that's trying to get stories out there about what families are actually facing, and works of art, and all different types of things. So there's that. My narrative changes more so on the inside game with Congress. And one of the points that Amy mentioned that um, and was a really big lesson learned to me from last year's fight about expanding the child tax credit is that the narrative change that needs to happen is that sometimes even though ending poverty is our end goal, it doesn't always need to be the thing that we lead with and lean into 100% in all of our messaging. Because the thing is that the public don't see themselves in that. If you were to poll people, making under $25,000 a year who are working, many of whom are below the, official poverty line, if you ask them if they were in poverty, they would say no. I work, I'm not in poverty. And so there's something where we can talk about these programs like guaranteed income, like child tax credit, in a more like inclusive way to also like just lower income and even, moderate income families, people I'm thinking in the income range between like 20 and 50,000. And so even though, like I said, our goal is to end poverty and we rightly focus on that, we can still come up with policies that will help that population, but sort of sell it in a way where we are also talking about the benefits to, families who may not be directly under the poverty line. And that is particularly important when we're talking to conservative offices, which at the end of the day, to get anything done in the federal government in general, and especially to get anything done that lasts long term, it needs to be bipartisan. And so like it cannot be just one side of the aisle that thinks, oh, families working in low wage jobs should get the child tax credit. And so we need to talk like that though, because like that's how like Josh Hawley or my Senator Jim Banks, the way that they talk about CTC is these families are working, they're working hard, they just work in low wage jobs and they're trying to take care of their families. And like that's the kind of messaging that works with Republican members of Congress. And so I think to some extent, the way that we move forward is by building more bipartisan consensus, by being willing to sort of speak to conservative lawmakers in their own sort of language. And I think it's really good for the public messaging too. Because again, I think a lot of families, if they're saying, oh, you only want to expand the child tax credit for families making $10,000 a year. Well, I make, 60, 50,000 a year and I'm raising four kids on 50,000 a year, which is not easy to do in very many places. And so kind of like, don't tell me that it doesn't matter if I get a credit too. And so I think that's some of the narrative, work that
You're
needs to be done.
exactly right, Dave. I mean, one of the things that I noticed when we did focus groups with conservatives in California, and one of the things that really came across was like, look, we're working, we're paying our taxes, and we want actually some of these programs to work more for us because we're struggling. The cost of living is going up, insurance is going up, gas is going up, groceries are going up. My wages aren't going up. And I want help too. Like, this is something that I think is sort of a national, like reconciliation that we need to do, is that
Yeah.
this idea of who's deserving needs to be shifted. Because so many people are financially struggling today. They may not be at the bottom level of poverty. So many people are financially struggling.